So this is going to be probably the third of 5 lectures for section 5.1, and if you printed out or looked at the section 5.1, there's 3 groups of problems. The top group of problems that we just did, solving square roots, plus or minusing square roots, that's on a test. The middle group of problems connects the top to the bottom problems. And this middle group of problems is a skill that's necessary to solve the third chunk of problems in section 5.1, but it's not a skill that comes on the test by itself. It's just to make the bottom problems easier. So I'm going to solve these problems, and they're kind of odd. But what these problems want me to do is they want me to change the c to a number so that I could factor this, and it factors into 2 identical parentheses. And this technique is called completing the square. And these are actually kind of easy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change the c to a specific number, and then I'm going to factor. So first I'm going to compute c, or find a number for c, and then ultimately I'm going to do something that I call lazy factoring. At first I won't lazy factor, but eventually I'll be able to factor without thinking. And c is always based on the number in front of the first power term, and so I'm going to figure out c by using the formula. C is the number in front of the first power term. In this case, the b to the first power term has an 8 in front of it, the coefficient of the first power term, divided by 2, and then squared. So c is the coefficient, or the number, I think I could spell this, the coefficient of the first power term without the letter. In this case, the first power term is 8. The coefficient of the first power term is 8, divided by 2 and then squared. So c is going to be 8 divided by 2, which is 4, and then squared. So my first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find a number for c. Now I'm going to change the c to that number. So this is going to be b squared plus 8b plus 16. Every time I pick a c, change the c to a number, and I factor, it should factor into 2 identical parentheses. If I wanted to factor this, which is the next part of this, so I've found my number for c, now I'm going to factor this into 2 parentheses. I know to lead off my parentheses, I get a couple of b's, because b times b is going to be b squared. And the numbers that need to go in my parentheses, the numbers part, they need to be plus plus. They need to multiply to 16. And they need to add to 8. They're always going to be the same number, and they're always going to be the number in the step before I found the c. Because 4 times 4, multiply 4 and 4 multiply to 16, and 4 and 4 add to 8. So the numbers that go in my parentheses are, for these problems, going to be exactly the same, because this is what this is saying. This right here is b plus 4 quantity squared. My answer to question 22 is going to be this. This is now going to factor into, I don't know if that's really equal, but those are really equal. But this is going to be my answer. This technique of changing a c to a number and factoring is the skill that's going to be necessary in the bottom group of problems. If I was doing problem 24, x squared plus 16x plus c, first I'm going to change a c to a number by using the formula. Take the coefficient of the first power term. Here there's an x squared and a 16x to the first power. The coefficient of the first power term is 16. I'm going to divide it by 2, and I'm going to square it. 16 divided by 2 is 8. And 8 squared is 64. So first I found a number for c. So I'm going to rewrite this problem as x squared plus 16x plus 64. And now I'm going to factor. Since there's not a number in front of the x squared, I know my parentheses are going to lead off with a couple of x's. And my numbers have to multiply to 64, and they have to add to 16. And for these C problems, the numbers are always the same number, and they're always the number in this parentheses. Because if I look at that number in the parentheses, and if I take two of them, if I multiply them, I get that number 64 at the end. And if I add them, they add to the middle number 16. So the factoring for this is going to be x plus 8 times x plus 8, which is equal to x plus 8 squared. My answer for 24 is going to be x plus 8 quantity squared, because if I'm multiplying two identical factors, I can write them once without with a square. Let's do 23 together, and then I'm going to lazy factor it. So for 23, y squared plus 10y plus c. First, I'm going to find the c. C is always based on the number in front of the first powered term, divided by 2, and then squared. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 5 squared is 25. This number in my parentheses, this is what I'm going to use to lazy factor. I'm not even going to spend the time to factor into two parentheses. I'm going to write the simplified one parentheses. So first I change the c to a number. C is going to be equal to 25. And then I'm going to lazy factor and write my answer. All of these problems are going to factor into two identical parentheses. The letter will lead off, and the number in the parentheses with its sign will fill in the parentheses. If I expanded this to two parentheses and made it y plus 5 times y plus 5, and I multiplied it out, I'd get that line there. This lazy factoring comes out really nice for the next few problems that have negatives. I don't even have to think about the factoring when I'm dealing with c's. When I construct the c's in this technique, dividing the coefficient of the first power term by 2 and then squaring, it will always, this thing will always factor into some quantity squared, and the number in the parentheses before I find the c, right before I square, is the number that's going to go in the parentheses. So I'll do problem 26, d squared minus 12d plus c. I'm going to say c equals the number in front of the first power term, which is negative 12, divided by 2, and then squared. That's going to be negative 6 squared. Negative 6 squared is negative 6 times negative 6. That's positive 36. I say that this is d squared minus 12d plus 36. I'm going to lazy factor for my answer. All of these problems with c will factor first letter without the exponent, this number squared. And that should be my answer. I'll show you that this checks. So if I wanted to check to make sure I factored correctly, lazy factored correctly, I would write this answer with two parentheses and then do the 4 multiplyings. The 4 multiplyings would be d times d, d times minus 6, minus 6 times d, and minus 6 times minus 6. D times d is d squared. D times minus 6 is minus 6d. Minus 6 times d is minus 6d. Minus 6 times minus 6 is plus 36. These, because they have the same signs, they don't cancel. you combine, you add the 6's and keep them negative. And that would be exactly that. So this is a really specific strategy that allows me to do factoring without thinking. So I'll do 28. So 28 is y squared minus 20y plus c. I'll figure out the c. C is going to be the negative 20 that's in front of the y divided by 2 and then squared. Negative 20 divided by 2 is negative 10. Negative 10 squared is negative 10 times negative 10, which is positive 100. Now I'm going to change the c to the plus 100, and then I'm going to lazy factor and get my answer. And inside my parentheses is just going to be that number. And my answer to problem 28 is going to be y minus 10 quantity squared. Again, there's not going to be a problem on the test that looks just like this, but when we get into the bottom group of problems, you'll see how this technique is going to be used. 2 more, no, 4 more, 5 more, tons more. Let's do 29 together. So 29, if you can't read it, it's x squared plus 6x plus c. C is going to be 6 divided by 2 squared, which is going to be 3 squared, which is going to be 9. So this is going to be x squared plus 6x plus 9. And then for my answer, that x squared plus 6x plus 9 factors into, there's a plus implied there, x plus 3 quantity squared. Now the ugliness that I couldn't probably naturally do if I didn't know the shortcut. So if I look at 32, v squared plus 9v plus c, this is bad, and this C technique can get grungy, and this is the grunge part. So C here is going to equal number in front of the first power divided by 2 and then squared, ugh. And to square that, that's going to be 9 squared over 2 squared. 9 squared is 81. 2 squared is 4. I'm going to rewrite this problem as v squared plus 9v plus 81 over 4. In general, I have no idea how to factor that. That's well beyond my abilities to factor, but I can still lazy factor. Usually, I take the number in the parentheses with the square after I divide by 2. Here, I can't divide by 2. My factoring is going to have a fraction in it. My answer, when the c comes out to be a fraction, I can still get it. I just have to back up to there. It's the parentheses, the most simplified parentheses with the square, and that's just going to be 9 over 2. This one I'm not going to check. You have to believe me that it works, or come visit me and I'll check it for you, but it's a nuisance to check. We could do 31 together. So C is going to be 3 divided by 2 quantity squared. I have to square this 3 and square the 2. 3 squared is 9, 2 squared is 4. So I can rewrite this problem as x squared plus 3x plus 9/4. And this is going to factor into x plus 3/2 squared. Oh, just maybe a few more, and there's one really ugly one. I think we'll just skip it because it just seems silly. So for 34, y squared minus 5y plus c, c equals negative 5 divided by 2 quantity squared. I have to square the negative 5 in the numerator and square the 2 in the denominator. When I'm squaring the negative 5, it technically should be in a parentheses. Squaring a negative, you get a positive. And squaring the 2, I get a 4. And so I'm going to rewrite this as y squared minus 5y plus 25 over 4. And in general, I couldn't factor this, but I can lazy factor, and my answer is going to be y minus 5 halves quantity squared. You do 33, I'll do 35 with you, and then we're going to skip this grunge of 37 and 38. We'll just skip these, so you can skip 37. That's just too much, and that would not really come up in a problem. So last one, you do 33, I'll do 35 with you. This is a squared minus 11a plus c. c equals negative 11 over 2 quantity squared. I need to square the negative 11. I need it in a parentheses if I'm going to do it on my calculator. Negative 11 squared is positive 121. 2 squared is 4. So I'll rewrite this as a squared minus 11a plus 121 over 4. Lazy factor this into a minus 11 halves quantity squared. That'll be my answer. So that's the end of part 3 of likely 5 parts. That's the middle group of problems, and then we'll move down to the bottom group of problems in a minute here. I'll move them in a minute. You might do it at another day.